Welcome back to Arcane Adventures Recapped. Today we will be recapping the events of our Lorem Ipsum campaign, Chapter 6 Trails and Tides. After a long journey, Lorem Ipsum enters the Twin Reservoirs, the massive stepped metropolis with its intricate network of pipes, ducts, and channels that control water access across a vast city. Upon leaving their horse and carriage in the care of Shimon, they decided it best to split up and venture across the city. Ultrix and Rancor head to the two major libraries, the Collegium Tidal in Oceavester and Claremorth University's Hydroxylvexin branch. Ultrix seeks to research rune carving and looks for sigil comparisons against the crescent moon shape they found in Provenere. Rancor, on the other hand, looks for information on the clay arm, Ozen, and possible validity of Aurel's story. Meanwhile, Sizik ventures across the city and finds himself in an exotic place known as the Puddle Jump Bazaar, where he haggles with merchants for spices and jewelry. While Pura and Evidin have gone off on their own ventures, Paloma and Owenel head to the shore of Vestment Lake, that is, to the south of Hydroxylvexin and Oceavester, where they book passage with one Mr. Harker to sail to the Isle of Waterwaltz and seek the monastery there with Master Elmgale, a person who reportedly previously taught Paloma's mother. Possibly. As Anaris gives way to the early twilight of evening, we regroup outside the massive Cascadance Spire, the home of the Chancellor of Fenere, and seek lodging for the night. In a bit of a spontaneous interaction, Sizik waltzes into the Grand Pearl Hotel, a lavish, luxurious hotel that offers only the finest suite rooms, balcony views, and running water bathtubs, all for the low, low price of 5 gold pieces per room per night. As we settle into our chambers, however, Rancor steps outside onto his own balcony to speak with Ozen for the first time since they met Aurel on the road. After a bit of investigating and searching through the arcana that binds Ozen as a weapon and as a sentient entity, Rancor presses and tampers with such magics that just narrowly allow him to grant Ozen a new ability and restore more of Ozen's previously guarded memories. With Lorem Ipsum tending to Rancor and the night drawing ever quieter, we finally retire to our suites in hope of sweet dreams and even sweeter rest. A bit earlier in the morning, Evidin finds herself in the heart of Oceavester as she enters the Plaza Les Fontaines, a serene and mindful religious center nestled within the surrounding neighborhoods. She enters into an old, time-worn chapel and its accompanying cemetery before searching amongst the dead for a man from her vision, Mortis Vale. It is only when the torchlight of the mausoleum is expunged that Evidin comes face to face with a cloaked priest of the Soul Matron, who offers her cryptic advice that guides her towards potential resolution and perhaps a way to end the curse she is afflicted with. Until then, Evidin is challenged to enter into commune and greater worship to her deity. It is only when she leaves this chamber that she sees a flash of blue light that resonates far across the city, and she darts out to investigate. Back at the Grand Pearl Hotel, however, Rancor is kindly placed into his bed to rest after his ritual interaction with Ozen. Evidin arrives with the group, and they are all able to get a good night's rest, with the exception of Pura, who is off elsewhere, as it seems, in the Twin Reservoirs. At dawn, Paloma and Owenel depart for more training at the Waterwaltz Monastery, while the rest of Lorem Ipsum has a close call, so to speak, with the Waveguard and Senator Alarion Vaymar, as they looking into the blue burst that was plainly seen from across the city. With some deception, however, the group persuades the Waveguard to move along. From there, it is thought best to split up and focus on collecting information to aid our group's investigation. Ultrix and Sizik head towards the Collegium Tidal, while Rancor and Evidin stay back at the Grand Pearl Hotel to speak with the proprietor, Opalina Caithmere, and acquire some information. Owenel heads off in search of something that reminds him of his visions. Upon communing with Helm, learns that this is perhaps the wrong place and wrong time for said vision to be true, and that time will be revealed when Owenel's protection is needed for the boy that he sees in his dreams. Owenel then consigns himself to the task of finding lodging for himself and his companions for the approaching evening, and he hears about the Hydrohaven, a restaurant and inn modeled after the Twin Reservoirs' culture and glory. Owenel, after meeting the proprietor of such an establishment known as Brugsy Carver, enjoys a late lunch as his food is carried about on a small bamboo raft floating in the winding stone bar that snakes the way across the tavern's lower room. The ambient sound of music and laughter and the turn of the water wheel filling the space as he waits for his companions to meet up with him once more. As Evident and Rancor speak privately within the Sapphire Lounge at the highest floor of the Grand Pearl Hotel, they each reveal a bit about what they know to risk for an exchange of knowledge. Meanwhile, back at the Collegium Tidal, Aldrich and Sizik look into the general history and the specific history surrounding Oshia Vesture and Hydroxylvexin and its governing bodies. However, as a bit of a detour, Aldrich looks into the university's public faculty archives, and in doing so, under the order of quote-unquote Andrew Rufflock from Montero, which raises more than a few brows as Sizik watches a battalion of Waveguard soldiers and Chancellor Inthidin Namigoth herself meet with the Grand Magister Ulthos Rowanwin of the Collegium Tidal, and they all enter the Registrar's archives to confront Altrix, who might have found himself in a position of digging a bit too much, but nonetheless, with Lorem Ipsum scattered across the cities, what comes next remains to be seen. Altrix is apprehended by the Waveguard and is taken to Cascadant's Spire, where he is further interrogated by Chancellor Inthidin Namigoth, Grand Magister Ulthos Rowanwin of the Collegium Tidal. Sizik, though attempting to stealthily follow Altrix, was also ultimately captured and taken into custody as well. In conversation, Altrix does his best to defend his actions and limit the knowledge given to the Chancellor and the Grand Magister. While this was successful overall, it did come up that Altrix was, at best, involved with the death of Andrew Rufflock through Altrix's own admittance, though the Chancellor seemed to take it well after reporting that Andrew Rufflock was most likely a treasonous man for violating government intelligence and selling it to an allied nation. Meanwhile, across the city, Paloma was training with Master Elngale, and had a small conversation regarding Paloma's mother and how she actually trained at the Waterwaltz Monastery. Upon her return to the mainland, however, she spotted a strange sighting where a fishing ship was lifted partially out of the lake and cracked in two before sinking. Seeing a large fin swimming towards the shore, she quickly used the chatter crystals to send a message to her companions and beckoned them to the shoreline to investigate. With everyone arriving with haste, 6 large reptilian beasts known as lacustrian drakes were found frantically wreaking havoc on the shoreline of the Brim Cove quarter in Oshia Vesture, tearing through market stalls, bashing into buildings, and absolutely terrifying the merchants and citizens. Lorem Ipsum did not hesitate to jump into action and take on the creatures. Not but 20 seconds later or so, the Waveguard also arrived on the scene, as a gargantuan creature emerged from the depths of the lake, a massive lake crab, and skewered one of the lacustrian drakes, killing it immediately. Realizing that the drakes were not simply attacking, but they were just running from a predator, not acting with hostility, our attention has turned towards the threat of the massive crab. One of the Waveguards was crushed between the pincers of such a crab, using a tidal slam to knock back our heroes. But before they could strike the crab again, a precision shot from Evident pierced through both of its thin eyes and landed a swift and final blow, killing the lake crab. Quickly afterwards, Senator Alarion Vaymar dismissed the group, technically thanking them, but also holding reservations that the Waveguard should be the ones to handle these matters. Nonetheless, our adventurers helped clean up the scene and depart. Moments before this, however, Stellia, the Lady of Prophecy and Fate, appears to Sizik and Paloma. Stellia confronted Sizik about his ability to intervene and save the Waveguard that was killed, and also his general demeanor towards his quest thus far. In consequence, until Sizik can prove himself worthy of his current walk of life, will be limited in his abilities. And with that, we return to the Hydrohaven as the afternoon pushes forth to hopefully enjoy rest in the coming hours. While at the Hydrohaven, Evidin makes us a delicious meal using some of the crab meat acquired from earlier today, when Pyrrha suddenly arrives and informs us where he has been for the last day and a half, including gathering some information relating to the Bright Shadow and a man from both Rancor and Pyrrha's past, known as the Physician. Gathering themselves, our party heads to the western Hydroxylvexen area within an area known as the Stillview Enclave, where they proceed to stake out the home of this man known as the Physician. Upon initial inspection, it does appear that someone is home, and they enter through the unlocked front door. Exploring the interior, they hear bathwater from upstairs and the turning of pages of a book from the nearby office. Moving into the study, we behold Gavivar Theeds, reading a book at his desk. When Gavivar realizes that this is not the presence of his daughter, he quickly questions what the party is doing in his home. Pyrrha wastes no time drawing upon a weapon and firing an arcane shot. Unfortunately, the weapon misfires because it is jammed, and thus Pyrrha and Rancor set out to ever so kindly remind this man of what he did to both of them and their families, to which he sighs and recognizes that his past has finally caught up with him. Despite his attempts to live a better life and explaining that everything he did was for his daughter and to pay for her healing that she desperately needed, Pyrrha and Rancor were not convinced, and the party came to a hard decision they had to make in that moment, meeting to a climactic and now morally gray standoff. After a bit of time, Gavivar Theeds' daughter, Briska Theeds, came to see what the commotion was all about. Gavivar offered the party anything they wanted to take from his office and his home, in hopes that they would just let him and his daughter be. But Pyrrha, in anger, attempted to strike and kill Briska Theeds, but Owenel stepped in the way. Sizik then slammed the door shut, and the party entered a full-on face-off against each other in a clash of morals and will. Even Ozen, Rancor's sword, did not condemn Gavivar, who stated that he carries his burdens of his past every day, and thus Rancor tried to force his sword to act under his own will, but was unable to do so. Owenel pulled Briska away from the scene, who was screaming and crying for her father's safety. Paloma and Sizik desperately tried to clear the heads of their friends when Aldrich simply opened the door and launched a vial of FSD into the room, causing the party to suffer serious hallucinations and behave even more irrationally than they perhaps already were doing. But Pyrrha, seeing his own daughter briefly amongst the hallucinations, despite every fiber wanting to destroy this enemy, was unable to take that life. Rancor, however, threw Ozen to the side and pulled out a mundane dagger, and with Theeds not resisting, Rancor ended his life. Rancor then covered himself in a panic with the dust of disappearance and jumped out the window of the office and ran. The Waveguard arrived on scene, taking each person there to one of their posts and questioned them to give an account of the events that had transpired. A case of cold-blooded murder. With Briska still heard sobbing as the party leaves the outpost of the Waveguard, Pyrrha vanishes into the night, also reeling with the events that have just happened, and Rancor is nowhere to be seen. The rest return to the Hydrohaven. Owenel is lost in thought and unable to sleep. Sizik restless. Paloma and Aldrich trying their best to get an ounce of slumber. But Sizik feels a familiar thread, and he follows it into the darkness and across the city, ultimately finding Rancor curled up in an alleyway, sulking. It is able by Sizik's goddess, perhaps, or even Sizik himself, to impart advice onto Rancor, and states that he believes everyone deserves a second chance at redemption, but there all are consequences to his actions. In that conversation, though, Rancor admits that his whole life has been molded into revenge, but perhaps there is some part of him that feels bad for what happened, and he processes the events from earlier in the night. An idea hatches so that maybe Rancor could keep Briska Theeds from becoming like himself. So he returns to the scene alone, locates Ozen and the cold body of Gavivar Theeds, and he uses Ozen, relinquishing the grudge in some way, to reach beyond this realm and pull Gavivar Theeds back from beyond the grave. Meanwhile, back at the Hydrohaven, Aldrich is awoken in the middle of the night by a mechanical bird tapping on his windowsill, and with an invitation to come to the Collegium Tidal library at once. Aldrich gathers his things amidst the darkness and sneaks out of the Hydrohaven in the middle of the night, finding the eerie silence of the library disturbed only by a small flicker of candlelight and the presence of the Blue Dragonborn Grand Magister Ulthos Rowanman. The two have a personal conversation about Daikia. When it is revealed that through their meeting, Daikia is the daughter of the Grand Magister, and Ulthos learns that Daikia is Ultrix's mother. Now reeling with newfound information that his daughter, whom he thought dead, was somewhere still alive, had married and had children, and that Ultrix was his grandson, and that maybe there was some hope that he would see his daughter once again. But Ulthos Rowanman admitted to Ultrix that he had many questions about where his mother had gone. Ultrix's mother, that is. And Ultrix admitted that he too had questions about what his mother was doing before she left to his hometown. Why she never said anything about Project Akadon, and what secrets of hers have been buried in the past. But Ultrix also admits that he wants to keep her safe, and thus he could not tell Ulthos Rowanman exactly where she was, because whoever was looking for her would go find her if that information was revealed. The Grand Magister nodded his head in agreement, and was left to deal with this truth, but also he offered Ultrix aid where he could grant it, and Ultrix said he would return. At dawn, Rancor watched the man he had killed gasp for air after being dead. Rancor admitted the motivations of his actions for trying to bring Gavivar back, and then, when Gavivar Theides was prepared to let Rancor walk out the door, Gavivar offered the aid to Rancor to help Rancor and his colleagues find the old allies of Gavivar Theides, and he handed Rancor a large stack of papers. With much to think about for our party, we take time to process what has happened, as yet another new day approaches. And dawn breaks once again. Pura is the first to stumble back into the Hydra Haven, still recovering from a hangover after the events of last night. The party and him exchanges some dialogue before even Rancor, carrying now a large stack of files, steps into the chamber. Shocked by his sudden return, the party is quick to convey their mistrust and troubled hearts. But Rancor enlightens the group that he has at least partially undone the mistake from the night before, that being the revival of Gavivar Theides with Ozin. Though the trauma of such an experience to himself, the party, Gavivar, and Gavivar's daughter will presently remain, along with the consequences he must face in the eyes of the law, should that come up in the future, Rancor nonetheless presents the group with the files that Gavivar Theides willingly gave him, which detail quite a few items, including the other colleagues of the Bright Shadow, and possible clues to their operations. Also a file regarding Aethlune, Pura's home, and the information used to raid the Temple of Sylvanas, and acquire an artifact that is codenamed SOS. Now, where have we heard that before? Ah, yes, Tony's map. And possible buyers of such an artifact, including a few powerful political figures from across Fenorbia and even beyond that may have been interested in purchasing this codenamed SOS. It made note that the final buyer was Silvar Adranis and a hefty price tag of 85,000 gold pieces. In another file, which records other things, suggesting more ties to Project Akadon, possible informants and leaks within the government that may have sold that information to vested interest, and the interests that appeared to have not panned out fully. Lastly, medical records in the hundreds to thousands detail the many, many experiments that Gavivar pursued to save his daughter, and even went as far to conceal her survival from his colleagues. But buried in all of this evidence was yet another clue pointing to an elusive phrase below the mouth. That is, elusive, until a knock came to the door, and a humanoid man introduced himself as Ulysses, providing documentation that he is here on behalf of Chancellor Namigoth, as a test, so to speak, of the party's motivations and goals, and to provide insight and aid into the idea of an elite crime lord within the Twin Reservoirs, none other than the Bright Shadow. Compiling all of their evidence, the Watermouth intake plant seemed to be the obvious choice, perhaps even too obvious. But even more perhaps, it was meant to be so obvious that it was clever. So Lorem Ipsum, joined by Ulysses, heads to southern Hydroxylvexen and located the remote Watermouth intake plant, which controls the dams and hydrostructure intake to the city, filters massive quantities of water, and supervises the water levels in Vestment Lake. The large facility is an amalgam of pipes, ducts, and valve systems, staffed by only a few engineers that live on site. After learning of the unusual seismic activity that occurred just a few days before our party arrived, we locate and speak with Director Orstric Felmar, who manages the facility on his own. And while the initial meeting was a bit choppy, the director ultimately admitted that a series of missing water reports had stumped him for months, and he had suspicions about a problem and reluctantly asked the party for their aid. We sweep through the massive facility, inspecting the filtration system, the intakes, and even the generator, navigating around some of the structural changes and damages sustained during the odd seismic activity. Perhaps such an activity could even explain the disturbance of the natural habitats of the lacustrine drakes and the massive lake crab. But once on the bottom floor, the director swore that everything was in order when Sizik first noticed that one of the buttons in the elevator shaft was slightly loose, and when he removed it, it revealed yet another button, which led the group to an even lower level, secretly concealed beneath the facility, an area dimly lit, the sounds of rushing water and muffled conversations in the distance, and a secret hideout of Karamira, her surgical and mechanical creation facility, much to the shock of our party and the director. While we did attempt to stealth our way through the narrow halls, finding several corpses along the way, it wasn't long until our cover was blown fully and a full combat broke out between the enemy forces and Lorem Ipsum. Despite a series of heavy blows to our party that seemed that they had the upper hand, it was soon realized that Karamira had perhaps accounted for these pesky investigators after the incident in Provenere and set up a dangerous, narrow funnel to fire attacks into, which quickly brought our heroes low. But what she did not account for was the use of her own drug, FSD, to be used against her employees, which leveled the playing field once more. Worried that this group may truly disrupt her plans, she jumped into action to take us head on. And she was successful in nearly decimating our heroes, but a few lucky shots brought even her into a dangerous position, and before she could even fathom an escape, Rancor, with a devastating and fatal move, swiftly ended the reign of Karamira, the Bright Shadow. With the tides of battle turned in our favor, the hostility and detonation of their own electrical generators left not a single employee of the Bright Shadow alive. The group now free to loot the chamber, and Ulysses preparing to return to the Chancellor to provide his report. The group found one final piece of evidence: the names of 5 council members from Provenere listed as high priority. We also found a pit of corpses, presumed to be the ex-subject used to create lifelike mechanical duplicates. But in that large pit, acting as some kind of sanitation device, was a large 10 by 10 by 10 foot gelatinous cube. Hooray. Now with Karamira gone, clues and evidence perhaps lead us to other places, and much work and recovery lies ahead. In the immediate aftermath of the fight against Karamira, Lorem Ipsum gathers themselves and information about the surgical projects of the Bright Shadow, Rancor, Pura, and Evident exit, leaving only Owenel, Paloma, Aldrich, and Sizik and Ulysses to fill in Director Orstric Felmar on the transpired events. While Ulysses prepares his report for the Chancellor, the rest of Lorem Ipsum explore possible methods of removing the gelatinous cube to take them back to Provenere with them. They also find a way to shut off the water, at least temporarily, which allows them to follow a cave to where the water was draining to, which they quickly learn was a broken pipe that led to the massive watermouth drain, and a narrow old ladder that ultimately gave passage back to the surface, albeit far removed from use in the last several decades or more. Unsure of how they would move the cube, though, Paloma and Sizik ventured to the Silver Wave Wharf in northern Oceavester to seek out a proposed magical shrinking box, which they luckily found at Copper-clad Klops, with the centaur Mophobjaclopicus and his cubical chinchilla companion, Cinch. After walking all the way back to the Watermouth intake facility in the rain, Paloma and Sizik find Owenel and Altrix using the corpses left in the chamber to lure the gelatinous cube down the tunnel and straight to Paloma, where she was able to capture it in the box. Now, with the cube captured, they begin their return to the Hydrohaven, before deciding that Owenel should probably have his rib checked out. So Paloma, Sizik, and Owenel went to the Plaza Le Fontaine to seek out Sister Rin Halbrook, a priestess of Helm, who was able to provide healing to Owenel. Ultrix, however, heads to Cascadant Spire, before accidentally meeting and running into High Attendant Raylan Vost. The High Attendant serves as the right hand to the Chancellor. And it appears, coincidentally, that High Attendant Raylan Vost was actually looking for Ultrix and his companions, to invite them to speak with the Chancellor about their endeavors. After returning to the Hydrohaven to gather a few of his friends, they spoke with Chancellor Intha Namigoth and received some insights and thanks for their work, and an invitation of her aid should they require travel elsewhere. After this, Ultrix visits the Collegium Tidal to speak with the Grand Magister Ulthos Rowanwin, who invited Ultrix to come look at the office of Daikia and her work on Project Akadon. After spending a bit of time poring over old research and ancient tomes, Ultrix returned to the Hydrohaven, where all of Lorem Ipsum was finally able to get some much-needed rest. As dawn breaks, Sizik discovers a mysterious letter at his bedside, accompanied by an intricate puzzle box. Meanwhile, Paloma makes her way to the Waterwaltz Monastery to visit Master Elngale once more. Pyrrha meets with Gavivar Thedes and comes to terms with his past. Elsewhere, Rancor and Ultrix discuss their plans for the day, and a heated exchange between Evidin and Ultrix leaves both in deep contemplation. Later, Owenel and Pyrrha travel to Cascadant Spire to begin booking passage via airship for their return to Provenere, as our investigation seems to lead us back there, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, Ultrix and Rancor explore the city, taking the time to do some shopping, and Sizik assists an elderly gentleman. Seeking a private conversation, Ultrix visits High Attendant Raylan Vost, where the two share a drink and lunch, and as the day progresses, Lorem Ipsum gathers at the private hangar of Cascadant Spire to embark on their journey northward, expecting an 8 to 9 day voyage back to the bustling city of Provenere. It is here that we meet Captain Ivory Callow, a Thrycreen hailing from the spaceport of Thrycris. As the airship ascends, Evid and Ultrix revisit their earlier discussion and perhaps make amends in their disagreements. Pressed for answers, Evidin finally reveals a major secret regarding the Vicari in Brentero and a past event that she uncovered in her own research. She expresses her growing concerns over a possible plot surrounding her home, noting strange coincidences between the Binds of Rime and Rime Hollow Gate, and what secret history she uncovered in the archives of the theocratic capital of the Alliance of Provias. With tension and contemplation ahead of us, we chart course for Provenere, soaring above the clouds. Sailing above the storm, we enjoy breathtaking views and take a moment to relax a bit. Each member of Lorem Ipsum partakes in their fair share of personal time, as Paloma discusses all things survival and space related with Captain Ivory Callow, as the Thrycreen also attempts to teach Owenel the ropes of flying an airship. Keyword attempts. Despite a rather turbulent endeavor, Evidin was able to have a conversation with the Soul Matron through her familiar crow, the Raven. Rancor enjoyed playing his new violin before him and Evidin took some time to spar on the main deck. Pyrrha got a bit experimental with his alcohol at the bar and found some interesting side effects. Some better, some worse, under the eye of Raylan Vost. Ultrix, with the help of Owenel, spent a great deal of time crafting and making progress on his many projects. Paloma and Sizik discuss Sizik's recently acquired mysterious letter and puzzle box. However, as our time on board draws to a close and the airship descends towards Provenere after 8 or 9 days, the skyport amidst the torrential downpour, and a unique conversation begins to unfold between Ultrix and Raylan Vost, including a sweet but mildly awkward revelation of some more romantic feelings harbored by perhaps both of them. Nonetheless, though, upon arrival, we find a group of well-defended individuals who don't appear to be Red Shielders that are prepared to sweep through the security of the ship for, security purposes. No doubt a new protocol in our absence. After making it back to ground level, though, a gust of wind delivers the front page of today's copy of the Hex Tribune, Provenere's main newspaper, to our feet, And that front page headlines reveal the extent of many changes that have been made in the 3 weeks we've been absent and visiting the twin reservoirs, including the dismantling of the Council of Provenere, the institution of a gilded order, and which might in fact replace the Red Shielders altogether, and even the strangest airship crash in Pickle Pines to the east that had a somewhat familiar blue moon-shaped insignia on it. Quickly processing this information, we make haste for the Coastal Chateau to meet Marigold Burrows and a plethora of new staff that she has brought on as laborers and defenders under the employment of our party. After taking a moment to give further orders to their staff, we depart to visit now ex-officer Mox Flynn at his home. It is here that a somewhat tense conversation is overheard while we're outside, between Mox and a man we can only assume to be Senator Onyx Miletus. Onyx, on his way out, catches a few of us trying to stealthily listen to their conversation, and Mox also comes to greet the party, not even expecting their arrival. Updates are provided and shared about the recent changes, including that Mox Flynn and Cleo Genorum are more than happy to retain Lorem Ipsum as private employees, given they can no longer serve as public consultants to the council that no longer exist. Onyx departs to give Mox and Lorem Ipsum some space to discuss their own matters, to which Mox is enlightened to the possibility that some of the previous council members may in fact have been replaced by duplicate mechanicals, and the extent that this criminal organization may have its influence may be greater than we thought. Given that Mox and Cleo were supposed to have an evening meeting with some of those aforementioned former council members, 3 of whom were listed on those patient names that we found at Hydroxyvexin, Mox suspected it would be less of a cordial meeting and more of a possible assassination attempt. Given the urgency to act, Mox promises to speak with Cleo and Professor Archulets to give them all time to convene at the Coastal Chateau and plan to temporarily flee the city. After a lengthy conversation and discussion about the trustworthiness of Senator Onyx Miletus, Lorem Ipsum agrees to have Mox inform him too of the situation. With only a few hours to gather what they need, plot their next objective, and make a hastened exit of Provenere, there is much to get done in the immediate future. Prior to leaving Provenere, the party splits up. Altrix and Paloma take the gelatinous cube to the Hex District to collect their reward, briefly being stopped by an officer Ithrinius of the Gilded Order, but nonetheless they were able to get that bounty for more than they even expected. Evelyn, however, took a lonesome visit to the estate of Athena Claremorth, where she found her father, Honoro Dazov, interrogating Athena Claremorth regarding if she knew where Evelyn was. After he left, Evelyn, in disguise, secretly, was able to check in on Athena and make sure she was okay, careful as not to reveal who she was to the headmaster. Now reconvening at the Coastal Chateau, we begin to lay out the plans for our next steps, waiting not too long before Professor Archulets arrives on the scene. Archulets begins to fill in some details regarding the binds of rhyme and his research, as he is now most certain that they source from Rhyme Hollow Gate, and they have various runes carved on the gears that generate some kind of protective field when they spin together. Not long after this does Mox Flynn and Cleo Genorum arrive, further discussing the findings and also hearing Archulets and Genorum discuss the mysterious, powerful tome, which research has been slowed given that the missing companion artifact to stabilize the sifting sigils of the pages is missing, and might in fact be impossible to locate. The party does their best, however, to fill in Archulets on their recent investigations into a criminal organization that is tied to the attacks on Provenere, investigations of various artifacts, running a drug operation, and maybe even has links to Acadon. Onyx Miletus also arrives to fill in details surrounding Acadon, which perhaps prompts an even further investigation, but in the more immediate time, an even prompter leave of Provenere at once. Lorem Ipsum and their acquired allies hatch a plan. Archulets will continue to work on research. Onyx will, of course, stay behind to stay on the supervisory of Provenere, but keep an eye on the situation to see if any further links to this criminal organization and their vested interest appear, while Lorem Ipsum, Mox, and Cleo will teleport to Straxorus and head south into Pickle Pines to search for the wreckage of a crashed airship. We promptly further into that teleport. Instead of landing outside in the city streets of Straxorus, however, we appear inside a very short house that Paloma and Sizit called home for a few years, the roof and floor now splintering by the towering heights of their companions. and we begin to explore the gnome and heron-gone village of Straxoris. We speak with the mayor of Straxoris, a rock that allegedly contains the spirit of the first settler of the village, Wayland Straxor IV. We also meet Dr. Glofagurken, a rather peculiar piccologist, that is a person who studies pickles, who agrees to lead us into the pickle pines to find the wreckage so long as the party provides some kind of protection for the occasionally angered pickle vines. But they didn't seem to be too much of a problem in our 5-day journey through the woods before we locate the ruins of the crashed airship, and itself has lodged in a dense patch of trees and is tilted and located off the ground. Once we climb aboard, our party begins a full search of the crash site. Ultrix finds the remnants of the engine, or lack of remnants, so to speak, is completely missing, likely due so because it blew up and blasted a hole in the hull of the ship. Paloma notes the cargo hold has been raided. Evidence sees the indications of struggle and conflict aboard, indicating the ship was hijacked and did not crash accidentally. And Owenel keeps watch as Cleo and Mox all just looking out in case anyone may arrive. Rancor looks through the captain's quarters while Sizik happens upon a secret chamber that contains only one page of the remains of a shipping manifest, and on that manifest, 2 names. Names that he never thought would be found here. That's all for this episode of Arcane Adventures Recapped, Chapter 6. We'll see you next time.